Thanks for that kind introduction, Judith. Not all of my books have been bestsellers, I need to confess. I wrote a book in 1981 about the internet, and it was a study in bad timing. I think my mother bought most of those. But what I'd like to do in the next 35 minutes, we'll leave some time for questions, is to convince you of the following idea. That all of the very deep problems that are being discussed at this magnificent event are not coincidental. They have an underlying cause. And all of the inspiring initiatives that are being discussed at this event are also not coincidental. They're part of a new movement to reinvent civilization around a new set of principles and around a new communications medium. And in fact, we're at a turning point in human history. If I could have my deck up there, please, that would be great. And what I'm going to do is start at an unusual spot to talk about this. Everyone these days talks about revolutions in this and revolutions in that. Well, what's happening right now is that we have a revolution in revolutions that's underway. And it's happening in the so-called Arab Spring. That up until 6 months ago, all revolutions in human history had a leader. Whether it was George Washington or Robespierre or Che Guevara or Mao Zedong. And sometimes the masses were ahead of the leader, but there was always a leader that organized the people and that was prepared to take power when the insurrection occurred. And what we've got today is what you could describe as Wiki revolutions. That it turns out the internet not only radically drops transaction and collaboration costs in business, it drops the transaction and collaboration costs of dissent and even rebellion. And throughout the Mideast, we had a new kind of social movement that was emerging. Now, this movement was not created by social media. It was created by people, in particular, a number of young people. It was not caused by social media. It was caused by oppression and unemployment and a new generation that said, we don't want to be subjects anymore. But the revolution was enabled by a new communications medium. And this medium was used not just initially for people to learn about opportunities to have a secular kind of society and a democratic society, and not just to bring people into the streets, but the media was used for all kinds of purposes that are not well known. For example, for military purposes. In Tunisia and Egypt, for example, snipers were killing unarmed young people in the streets. And what the kids did is they took pictures of the snipers, they geolocated them, and they sent them to friendly units in the military who took out the snipers. You think social media is about hooking up online? Well, actually, in this case, it was about defending unarmed people against murderers. So, oh, by the way, if there are any would-be tyrants in the audience, I'd like to make a recommendation to you. When your people revolt against you using social media, don't shut down the internet. It's a big mistake. You see, because first of all, if you shut down the internet, the only way that people have to communicate is to come into the streets. The network theory holds that the activity is in the center of the network, and you have all kinds of remote nodes that are inactive. You shut down the internet, you trigger those nodes to become active. Moms can't find out what's wrong with their sick kid, and small business people can't do their business, and they get engaged. And furthermore, throughout revolutions, normally the tipping point is a general strike. Well, the internet is now the foundation for wealth creation, commerce, the creation of public value, social discourse. You shut down the internet, you create a general strike against yourself. So keep that in mind if any of you are planning on becoming dictators. Now, why do I start at this particular discussion? Well, this is symptomatic of a very profound change that's taking place. Now, I began to describe this many years ago, and more recently, I wrote a book in 2007 called Wikinomics. And Wikinomics was about how the internet is not about hooking up online or creating a gardening community or websites or .coms or eyeballs or stickiness or anything like that. It's a new global computational platform that drops transaction and collaboration costs. And that means that there's a profound change taking place in the deep structure and architecture of the corporation and of how we innovate, how we create goods and services, because talent can now be outside the boundaries of companies. And networked business models work better than traditional industrial age corporations. Well, the book did great, and I was very pleased, and then something happened. We had the global financial meltdown. Who would have imagined 4 years ago that one of the big themes of business books these days would be how to save capitalism, or is capitalism even savable? And these books are not being written by radicals. They're being written by people like Matthew Bishop and Michael Green, the business editors of The Economist, who've written a book called The Road from Ruin. Now, Paul Krugman is not in the audience, is he, by any chance? Oh, it's too bad. Because for some reason, I've ended up speaking at the same conference at Paul Krugman in a number of situations. And the first time was in Berlin. He got up and he said, he's a very thoughtful guy, you know who he is, and he said, controversial too, and he says, when you have the meltdown of a financial industry, you get a prolonged period of slump. Japan had one in 1992. They're still in a slump. So get ready for a couple of decades of ugliness. And that's the good news scenario, because some really bad things can happen that can cause the whole global economy to go into a depression. Now, far be it from me to debate with a Nobel Prize-winning economist, but I have a slightly different view. To me, the future is not just something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very different future than the one that he outlines. But to do that, we need to understand what the problem is. And the problem doesn't fall within the paradigm of traditional economists, I don't think. They worry about important things like the business cycle, and should we have more fiscal stimulation or austerity and so on. I think what we're going through today and what you're talking about at this festival is not fundamentally a cyclical thing. It's a secular change. That is, we're at a turning point in human history where many of the institutions of our civilization that have served us well for decades or even centuries are now in various stages of being stalled or in atrophy or being frozen or even failing. And they've taken us as far as they can around their old model. And we need to rebuild all of these around a whole new set of principles and a new communications medium, and we can do that. And I'm not discouraged at all. I think there's never been a more exciting time in human history. This is a time of great peril and danger, but it's fundamentally a time of great opportunity. Now, these are each chapters of Macrowikinomics, and I can't talk about them all today, but just very briefly, for each of these, you have a failing institution contrasted with these sparkling new initiatives to rebuild that institution around a whole new model. The industrial age corporation, typified by General Motors, America's greatest company, it went bankrupt. So there are new network models of the auto industry, a company called Local Motors, where an Iraq vet, Jay Rogers, decided that the reason that we're in Iraq is to defend America's energy sources, and a lot of that energy is going into this sclerotic automobile industry that's been externalizing its costs onto society for years. It's failed to create fuel-efficient and safe and appropriate automobiles. He's building a new kind of auto company. He has 5,000 designers, but they're on the internet. They're not inside his boundaries. He doesn't have a 3 million square foot manufacturing facility. He has 30 local plants and local geographies across the US making local cars addressing local needs and hiring local people. Now, could this scale? Well, the bad news, I suppose the good news for Jay Rogers, is that he's now got competitors. The financial system, I mean, arguably, it needs more than some fresh regulation. It needs a whole new modus operandi, doesn't it? Based on collaboration and openness and integrity, understanding that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. Newspapers, been many sessions on social media here. I was at one last night. Newspapers in the industrial model are going away. 70 newspapers have gone bankrupt in the last decade in the United States. And as one youngster said to us, if news is important, it will find me. News has become a commodity. Now, there's still a need to inform ourselves as a society. We need good journalism, we need investigation, we need to have balance. I mean, is there a danger that we'll all end up in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers where we can follow our own point of view, and the purpose of information is not to inform us, but to give us comfort? We need to pay journalists. So as the old model fails, there are exciting new models, and some of these were discussed last night, in a session emerging of the network news where all of these issues are being addressed. Our systems for global problem solving are failing in solving global problems. Take something like climate change. Bill Clinton was saying to a bunch of us at Davos this year, that if we reduce carbon emissions by 80% in the year 2050, not 6%, 80%, it'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down. In the meantime, some bad things are going to happen. You can expect 1.5 billion people to lose half of their water supply in the next 10 to 20 years. This is a big problem. So we have our global institutions that try and solve it. We have Copenhagen and Cancun. We can't come up with a deal. Meanwhile, I estimate there are 20 million people that are organizing around this issue. And they're not Malcolm Gladwell's slacktivists. You know, they go onto Facebook and say like and figure they're changing the world. Sure, there's plenty of them. 200 million people on Facebook causes. But there's 20 million that are actually doing something around this issue. They're architects figuring out how to retrofit old buildings, and kids in schools figuring out how to reduce climate in their school district. This is the first time in human history where the world is being mobilized and we're all on the same side. We've been mobilized before around world wars, but we were on different sides. You know, it turns out the killer app for social media may be changing or maybe saving the planet, literally. Now, I could go on and on. The universities are losing their monopoly on higher education. We have the very best model of learning that 18th century technology can provide. The smartest kids in America don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to the lecture. One youngster says to me at Harvard, why would I go to a lecture? A teaching assistant is talking to 400 kids. You can't even ask a question. The topic is Peter Drucker. I can go online and interact with a real-time Peter Drucker. The lecture, you know, it's an industrial age model of learning. Mass education, mass media, mass production, mass distribution, mass marketing, mass democracy. All of these assume a centralized authority. One way, it's one size fits all, and the people out there are recipients. They're inert, they're passive, they're an audience. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge. You're a student, you're an empty vessel, you don't. Get ready, here it comes. I mean, to me, the lecture is the process whereby the notes of a lecture go to the notes of a student without going through the brains of either. Now, I appreciate the irony that I'm standing up here giving you a lecture. But you're not going to learn. Nobody here is going to remember the 16 institutions, transformation, and the 5 principles, and the 7 new business models. And I'm just trying to convince you of a single idea, and there's a role for a lecture in doing that. So we could go on and on. I'm going to come back. And in the discussion, we can talk about any of these that you want to. Now, if you want to understand what's happening today, to get to the point, I don't think, again, with respect to Paul Krugman, you go back to 1991 or 1982 or even the Great Depression, you need to go back earlier. Several hundred years ago, all around the world, we had an agrarian economy. The means of production and political system was called feudalism. And knowledge was concentrated in a tiny oligopoly. People didn't know about things. There was no concept of progress. You were born and you died. But then Johannes Gutenberg came up with his great invention. And over time, people, broader classes, began to acquire knowledge. And when they did, the institutions of agrarian feudal society appeared to be stalled, or frozen, or in atrophy, or even failing. It didn't make sense for the church to be responsible for medicine. when people had knowledge. It didn't make sense for a bunch of kings and nobles to be running everything. So we had the rise of parliamentary democracy. That's what the American Revolution was, and the French Revolution, and Bolivar, and the national liberation movements all across Latin America. We saw the creation of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther called the printing press God's highest act of grace. We saw the creation of science and the corporation and eventually capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, and it was all good. It advanced our standard of living, but it did come with a cost. And now, once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle, but this time it's very different. The printing press gave us access to the written word. The internet enables each of us to be a publisher. The printing press gave us access to recorded knowledge. The internet gives us access not just to information and knowledge, but to the intelligence contained in the crania of other people on a global basis. This is not an information age. It's an age of networked intelligence. And it's a time of unprecedented opportunity. Now, these ideas that I just told you are not new. I've been writing about this for 30 years. Some of you may have written a book by, or read a book by Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave, right? He talked about an agrarian and then an industrial, and then he called it an information age. That's fine. We can cut him some slack on that. That was 30 years ago. These were ideas in waiting. They were ideas whose time had not come, and they were waiting for some big developments to occur. So let me just describe those to you, and then we'll throw it open and have a conversation. The first is they were waiting for the so-called Web 2.0, the new web. This is not a platform for presentation of content. It's a platform for collaboration, and it's ubiquitous. I mean, we don't access the web through PCs tethered to a desktop, but through inert objects, billions, soon trillions of them, that are smart communicating devices. I mean, your door here has a chip in it. It's internetworked. The door probably has an IP address, which means it's an internet appliance. I had a camera stolen from a hotel room in Miami. The door knew about me. It knew who'd been in and out of the room. We found an unauthorized access. I have a friend in Toronto. Everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. And all these things talk to each other. I have no idea what his toaster says to his refrigerator. But he was actually bragging that his fence talks to his sprinkler system. And I said, well, Ken, why would you care? He says, well, Don, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So this is pervasive ambient computing, and it's all about collaboration. The second thing that these ideas were waiting for was the rise of the first generation to come of age in the digital age, the first generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language, okay? I started studying kids about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. At first I thought, my children are prodigies. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with about 300 kids, and I wrote this book in '97 called Growing Up Digital. Well, flash forward to today. These kids are not just growing up, they're grown up. They're coming into the workforce, into the marketplace, into society, and there's no more powerful force to change every institution in society than the first generation to be bathed in bits. And this is humbling, because it's the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. I was an authority on model trains when I was a kid. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, healthcare, learning, entertainment, every institution in society. So this is just an example. Sometimes I interview kids in front of audiences. This is a big crowd, it's about 7,000 people. And out of the mouths of babes. On the left there is a young woman. She was 21 at the time, named Rahaf Harfouche. Studying in Syria, her boyfriend, she's born in Syria, studying in Paris, her boyfriend lives in Toronto. They turn on video Skype all day long to keep their relationship going. They cook together across the Atlantic Ocean. I said to her, Rahaf, your generation, do you use email? And she said, oh no, Mr. Tapscott, email is sort of yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? She says, email, that's sort of like a formal technology, say for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. 2 down from her is Sherry Kong, 20-year-old student in New Zealand, hired along with 80 other students by the government there. Their job? To teach the teachers how to use the internet in the classroom. I asked her, so Sherry, what are the teachers like as students? She says, the teachers, well, Mr. Tapscott, they're terrible. They talk in class, they don't do their homework, I'm giving out pink slips all the time. And beside her is Michael Furtick. He's the granddaddy of them all. He was like 27. I've known Michael since he was 13. He was the project manager on my website, growingupdigital.com. And they made him the project manager as a 13-year-old because he was the oldest and most experienced. When Michael was 15, he sold his own website for an undisclosed 7 or 8 figure US dollar sum. One of the news reports said it was probably only $1 million, and I sent him an email. I said, Michael, you sold it for $1 million. You should have called me. And he wrote back and he said, Don, legally, I can't tell you how much I sold it for, but I can tell you I'm very happy. And he didn't want the money to buy a Ferrari, although he bought a cheap little car, but his mom had to drive around with him because he only had his learner's permit, right? He wanted the money to invest in his next new venture. It's called takingitglobal.org. This is 1 million young people. It's a social network of kids who want to change the world. So all this stuff about this is the dumbest generation, they're net addicted, glued to the screen, losing their social skills, the internet is dumbing out an entire generation. It's eating the neocortex of youth today. Kids don't give a damn. You know, none of this negative view of youth with regard to technology is supported by data. You know, it's the smartest generation. The bottom third is a big problem. The top third are spectacular. Graduating like never before. The middle third are doing pretty well. They don't give a damn. We've created a little army of narcissists, says Jean Twenge in a book, Generation Me. Well, youth volunteering in the United States in high school and university has been up year over year for 15 years. Oh, they're all criminals and into all this bad stuff. Youth crime has been dropping year over year for 15 years. And I was talking to Michael Porter at Davos. He said the crop graduating from Harvard, he's never seen anything like it. They're kids who care a lot. They got really deep values, and their number one choice is not to work for Goldman Sachs. It's to work for Teach America. So we can be enormously hopeful about this generation. Now, you put those two together, and you get a social revolution. There are 750 million people on Facebook. And Facebook is just one of the platforms whereby this is occurring. This is something very profound. Let me try and explain an angle on it. I'll do it with a humbling story. It was about 4 years ago, and I gave my son Alex, he was a junior in college, 20 years old. I gave him an advanced copy of Wikinomics for Christmas. I gave him some other things for Christmas, too, but he said, thanks, Dad. He went off, started reading the book. He came back a couple hours later. He said, hey, Dad, this is a good book. It's like he's surprised or something. And so he said, I think I'll create a community on Facebook. 15 minutes later, he's got the Wikinomics community. Another 15 minutes later, he's got 6 members. Before we're eating turkey on Christmas night, he's got 130 members in 7 countries, 7 regional coordinators, a president himself, a secretary and chief information officer for the community. He's put out a PDF of the first 2 chapters of the book. Before I'm eating Christmas dinner, I got kids writing in saying, Mr. Tapscott, we found errors in your book. And the community is placing demands on me. One of the kids writes in and says, exactly how is Mr. Tapscott going to be contributing to our community? You know, what is this? 2 words, self-organization. Self-organization's been around throughout human history. Language was a function of self-organization. But what used to take place over millennia or centuries can now happen very quickly. And you understand this, and it's a revolutionary force. Now, Barack Obama understood it during the election campaign, and he changed the way elections are done forever. Did he change the way you rule, not just get elected? Arguably not, and that's hurt him. the way I discovered this, it was in the very early days, about 4 years ago, someone said, you know, the senator from Illinois is trying to get the Democratic nomination. He thinks your book is the key to getting elected and to changing America. Go to myBarackObama.com. So I went there, and there was my book. And it says, we believe in the principles of self-organization, the use of the internet in every way possible. In the book, Wikinomics, he says, I'm asking you to believe not just in my ability to bring about real change in Washington, I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing. Well, my first reaction was, I am the man. But it turns out I'm not the man, because I went there and I started looking around. There was a Wikinomics community. There was also a single moms for daycare for Obama community. And there was a New Yorkers for Obama. And there was a young firefighters for Obama. He created a platform whereby 35,000 communities self-organized, and that's what brought him to power. And that's not just my point of view. It's his point of view. So all of that comes together to create an economic revolution. And that's a change in the corporation. And throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through these vertically integrated companies that did everything from soup to nuts. And over time, networks and now the internet are dropping transaction costs. And that means that the boundaries of the corporation are becoming more porous, and that peers can now come together and create value. So if you could create an encyclopedia with 1 million people they've never met, it's 10 times bigger than Britannica, but according to the big study that's been done, the quality is just as good, roughly. What else could you create? Could you create a computer operating system through peer production? Well, the Linux operating system is the dominant operating system for medium and large computers in the world. It's becoming, this year, the dominant operating system for mobile devices. Linux is used in nuclear power plants. It's created by a bunch of volunteers. It's owned by no one. And it has some big new customers. One it announced recently is China. It's a big customer, China. Social networking is becoming social production. That's the next step. The internet is not about websites. It's a new means of production that's changing the way that we get capability to create things like knowledge products or an operating system. Could you create a physical good? This way, with the Chinese motorcycle industry is thousands of little, or hundreds of little companies that cooperate together. They meet in tea houses and on the internet. There's no Harley Davidson. There's no OEM. There's no company pulling all the strings. This is now close to 40% of all global motorcycle production. It's the biggest motorcycle industry in the world, and get ready for the $1,000 car from China using the same model. So this is a profound change that's going on in how we create wealth and how we innovate in society. And just a quick example, this guy, Rob McEwen, the reason I know this story, he's my neighbor. He moved across the street from me. And he held a cocktail party to meet the neighbors. He says, you're Don Tapscott. I know. I said, great, what do you do? And he says, well, I used to be a banker, and now I'm a gold miner. And he's a funny guy. He introduces his wife to the group. He says, Cheryl, she's a gold digger. And thankfully, she's an enormously competent person with a sense of humor. But anyway, he tells me this amazing story. He takes over this gold mine. His geologists can't tell him where the gold is. So he gives them more money to get more geological data. They can't tell him where to go into production. After a few years, he's so frustrated, he's ready to shut the whole thing down. But one day, he does a radical thing. He wonders, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he takes his geological data, biggest secret in the mining industry, he publishes it and holds a contest on the internet called the Gold Corp Challenge. It's basically $500,000 for anyone who can tell me, do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He gets 77 submissions. They come from all around the world. They use techniques that he's never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, he finds $3.4 billion worth of gold. The market value of his company goes from $90 million to $10 billion. Today, Goldcorp is worth $33 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. Now, what's going on here? He thought differently about how to build an organization. He peered. He was open. He shared his intellectual property. And he embraced a new set of principles. Now, These are four huge drivers that's creating this new situation. And there was another one. We were waiting for something else, and that was a convulsive shock to the system, the global economic meltdown. And this is not over. Oh, we're in a recovery. It's a jobless recovery, but it's a recovery. Well, tell that to the 40% of youth in Spain who are unemployed, or the 23% of young people in the United States who are unemployed. Jobless recovery is an oxymoron to me. It's like, you know, scented deodorant or jumbo shrimp. It's a contradiction. There is no recovery unless it's inclusive. And a lot of the discussions here are addressing this lingering malaise. Well, I don't think that tinkering with the situation is going to fix it. We need to fundamentally rebuild at least 16 of our institutions. We need to build them around collaboration. We need openness and transparency. Companies are going to be naked anyway. WikiLeaks on governments is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, of course, it's not in the public interest that all diplomacy be held in the open, and government employees should respect their confidentiality agreements, but WikiLeaks is just the tip of a new age of hyper-transparency where these institutions are going to be naked. And overall, this is a good thing because sunlight is the best disinfectant. I spend a lot of time with governments in the emerging economies, and corruption is a huge problem. It is everywhere. If you're going to be naked, there are a number of corollaries. One is that fitness is no longer optional. You know, we've been saying, you're going to be naked, you need to be buff, in the sense of you need to have good value, because value is evidence like never before, but you also need to have values and integrity as part of your bones. Interdependence. We're all increasingly connected now in this global economy, and we need to have institutions that act with integrity, that have that as part of their bones and their DNA. So let me close off here by just saying I'd be delighted to answer questions on any one of these. Science, pharmaceutical companies, in the next 18 months are going to fall off something called the patent cliff, where they'll lose 25% to 40% of their revenue. We need to reinvent science and start embracing these principles, for example, to share clinical trial data. Our healthcare systems, our industrial age models, all the debates in the United States around healthcare all fall within this industrial age view that I'm a physician, I'm a clinician, I have knowledge, you're a patient, you don't, you're passive, I deliver healthcare to you, and the only time you get it is when you come into the system. Well, we can't fix healthcare by spending more money. We need to move towards a collaborative model. I'd be happy to explain what that is. So, this is a time of great change. And this, I think I just described to you a new paradigm. And when you get one of these, you get a leadership crisis. New paradigms they cause dislocation and conflict, and they're nearly always received with coolness or worse. Vested interests fight against change, and leaders of the old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. How are we going to find leadership to bring about change? Well, that's the exciting part, because the old model of the leader, the great visionary, you know, Winston Churchill, Lee Iacocca, the K-car, that's the way to go. The person who comes up with a vision and sells it down. The person at the top can't learn for the organization as a whole. Things are becoming too complicated, which is why leadership is increasingly coming from everywhere. It's each of our personal opportunity if we will it. And we can now work together on networks to create new kinds of collaborative and even collective leadership where we can have a new kind of networked intelligence. So I'd like to end just by talking to you about the promise. And I'm going to do something that's a little unusual. Towards the end of our research in this stage, we started looking for examples of networked intelligence that might come from nature. We studied hundreds of human organizations, and we looked at bees and termites and all kinds of things, and we ended up looking at something called the murmuration. And I don't know if you know that word, but throughout the moors in England, over the cold winter months, starlings are out doing their starling thing for about a 20-mile radius throughout the day, foraging for food and stuff like that. And at night they come together and they create one of the most extraordinary things in nature. It's called the murmuration, in reference to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. And the murmuration is not just for show. It has a number of functions. It protects the birds as they can come together collectively to ward off a predator. It keeps the birds warm at night. And you can see on the right here, that's a hawk, a predator that's being chased away by the collective power of the birds. And there's no one leader. There is a leader at all times, but leadership constantly changes. And the murmuration kind of functions according to these principles that I was describing to you. It's a big collaboration. There's a lot of openness. There's sharing of information, including stuff like food sources. And there's a certain interdependence. The birds understand or behave as if that the interests of the individual bird is in the interests of the collective as a whole. And there's a funny kind of integrity that gives the birds great courage to attack a predator or to do the right thing for each of them as individuals. And when the moment is right, this spectacular thing happens. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something from this? I don't know. But I look at this thing and I get a lot of hope and a lot of confidence, because I think about those kids in the streets today, still in the Middle East, that are risking their lives, and they understand that their collective interests are consistent with their individual interests. You know, during the Egyptian Revolution, many people said that the kids will go home. Mubarak is so strong, he'll be able to hold in there. And I wrote that that will not happen, because if the kids go home, he will hunt them down and he will kill them. So this is a time when we can collectively perhaps move forward. Now, how so? I said it's not an information age. It's an age of networked intelligence. Could we go beyond just sharing of information or knowledge to somehow share our crania, to link our intelligence together? Could we create some kind of consciousness that extends beyond an individual or a group or a team or an organization or a society? If we could do that, we could solve many of the problems that face us. The learning organization, been unable to achieve it. Maybe organizations that aren't conscious can't learn. I look at this and I get a lot of hope that, I don't know, this smaller world that our kids inherit might be a better one. It's a French philosopher who said that we should respect the future for soon. We should respect the future, for soon it will be the past. But we should welcome the future. Sorry, I really blew that. I'm going to try that again. His name was Santana, and he said, we should welcome the future, for soon it will be the past. But we should respect the past, for it was all that was humanly possible. I think it was humanly possible to do what we did. We created these institutions and they advanced us. But you look around, it's now possible to go forward. And another Frenchman, Victor Hugo, said there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come, and the time has come for this change. So let's have a conversation. Thank you very much. And they're going to bring mics around because this is being recorded. We have a question up here at the front.
Hi, my name is Bob Cargman. I'm from Boston. Applying your thinking to public education, the intuitional flash that came to me, which I'd like to hear your responses, that we have vast failure, and we have the General Motors, public school systems, basically teachers' unions. That's what we've seen, a prehistoric creature So the question is, would you give every family a voucher? Because this creates murmuring, and they will begin to move around and have the freedom, which they do not have, even though governments spend vast sums of money, to find the ways in which parents who know best how their children should be educated can start to murmur.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me say I don't think the problem with public education is teachers' unions. There are bad teachers, like there are bad physicians and bad bus drivers and everything else, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel to find some of those and make a movie about it. But we have a much deeper problem with education. There are two. One is that we have an industrial age model that's based on transmitting. Teachers have it being the source of knowledge, transmitting information and knowledge to students who are relatively passive recipients of that. That wasn't bad for my generation. I was happy to sit in a class and be told things by a teacher because I was in recipient mode. I was broadcast to as a youngster 24 hours a day on television, as were all the baby boomers per kid. 24 hours a week. I went to church and I was broadcast to, and the org chart of my family was, father knows best, mom reported to dad, and the kids reported to mom. And I was kid number 1 of 5, which meant the dog reported to me, so that was good. But all the communications went down. I went to school and I had a teacher who broadcast to me, and I went into the workforce and I had a boss who told me what to do. I was kind of cool with that, but we've got a new generation that's grown up interacting and collaborating. They think differently, they learn differently, and we need to reinvent the model of pedagogy. That's the fundamental problem here. And you don't have to do this if the class size is 8. You don't need any technology. But if class sizes are going from 25 to 50 in Wisconsin, I was with a bunch of teachers from there recently, the teacher becomes simply a custodian, not even a transmitter of information. We could do what they're doing in Portugal, which is every kid in Portugal at the end of this year will have a laptop connected to a high-speed network, and the goal is it's not about technology, it's a change in the relationship between the student and the teacher in the learning process. Teacher stands up and she says, okay, kids, today everybody go to the astronomy blog, and the kids go to the blog, and then there's a solar system on the screen. She says, today we're going to talk about the equinox. Who knows what an equinox is? And there are 7-year-olds in this class that I was in, and nobody knows. So she says, okay, you know what to do. You know the routine. The routine is find out by yourself, partner up with somebody, create a little group. The class explodes. It's noisy. Kids are running around. They're on Wikipedia and into Google, and they're searching. And one little group, we know what an equinox is. They explain it to the class. The teacher is not a transmitter of data. She's curating a customized learning experience that's collaborative. The kids are loving the equinox, they're loving astronomy, they're loving learning, and they're learning how, they're acquiring capability in the way that's appropriate for their generation. I mean, when I was a kid, I graduated, you were set for life. You graduate today from university, you're not set for life. You're set for like 15 minutes or something. If you took a technical course, half of what you learned in the first year is obsolete by the time you get to the 4th year. So it's not so much what you know when you graduate, it's your capacity to think and to learn. Tom Friedman said this in a session in this room. The number one thing employers are looking for is problem-solving abilities, not skills or knowledge. Now, of course, we need skills and knowledge, but so we need to reinvent the model of pedagogy. Secondly, we need to reinvent how education content is created. How bizarre that all across America we have tens of thousands, probably, of grade 9 teachers, each developing their own little notes and PowerPoint and whatever, routines and so on, tests about what a cosine is. There's probably a best way to do that. How bizarre that we have statistics profs, thousands of them, each explaining what an analysis of variance is with their own little way. There are probably 5 best ways to do it, and they're culturally specific. We need to share in the creation of the content of knowledge and the content of learning. So these are big changes, and I think they're not typically the discussions that we have today. Oh, computers for every kid in America, we can't afford that. Portugal can afford it. They built a partnership. How can we not afford to enable our children to have their birthright, which is the learning technology of their time? This is an institution we need to change. That was kind of a long answer. I'll try and make them shorter in the future. Over here.
Hi, Joanne Dressendorfer. You talk about the revolution of revolutions. I'm just curious of what you see the economic revolution of healthcare being.
Well, again, thank you. We have an industrial age model of healthcare, and it's a sort of a broadcast model. And all the debates about should we have, single payer or public funding or whatever, they all assume that that's the basic model. Here's my modest little proposal. Every American baby should get a website. And it's half electronic healthcare record and half a social network for health. You have a news feed, you can create little groups, and as you get older, you use this. This is secure. The data in your record is provided by the healthcare system and by clinicians and medical people, but you have transparency into your own record. Do you know that in health, the number one risk factor is isolation? Why don't we create a collaborative model of healthcare? You have Lou Gehrig's disease today, you're on Patients Like Me. This guy, his brother had ALS, he created this thing, Patients Like Me for people with rare diseases. Patients Like Me is a powerful platform for people with that disease to collaborate, and it's now a basis for all kinds of research for science and medicine. Why couldn't we extend that from ALS to everything? How are we going to deal with the problem of obesity in the United States? What's the data? I heard, I don't know if I have it right, that something like 20% of cesareans in the United States come because the woman is morbidly obese. We're going to fix this problem by lecturing people and telling them they should lose weight. You get people in collaboration, and they can start to manage their weight and start to manage their health. To me, this is the only way that we're going to reduce the cost of healthcare and deliver better quality healthcare, is for people to become informed, to be collaborating, and to take responsibility for their own health. If we do that, we could change the whole paradigm.
Can you talk a little bit about micropayments or different? You're talking about a very different economic model for the corporation. What I assume, besides the $500,000 big prize for the gold exploration, that there's got to be all sorts of other models for how the corporation changes over to this sort of wisdom of crowds sort of interaction with its customers.
Yeah, and that's a big conversation that I won't be able to go into really, but I think the old industrial age model of the corporation is pretty much done, and companies that have stuck with that are falling behind. I mean, Cisco understood you create a network. You focus on what you do best, you partner to do the rest, and they succeeded. Their competitors, Nortel and others, fell behind. A business model can confer competitive advantage. Now, when it comes to payment systems, there's a whole new world that's exploding. And the exciting stuff around micropayments, to me, is things like Kiva. And we talk about this in the book. Who knows about Kiva? Anybody? Wow, what a great group. Okay, so this is, a couple of people decide that for $70, you can get a farmer in sub-Saharan Africa a pump that he or she can step on and irrigate a field and feed a village. But somehow our international institutions are having difficulty doing that. So they created this system whereby you can you can microfinance this kind of stuff. Kiva's done over $200 million now in these kinds of projects. I think we'll move into all kinds of models where this kind of thing occurs. I'll give you one, the music industry. I mean, the internet was the best thing to ever happen to the music industry. But they responded badly. They had a technology and business model disruption. They needed to respond with a technology and business model innovation. But instead, they took a legal response. And the industry that brought you Elvis and the Beatles is now suing children, is hated by its customers, and is collapsing. What they needed to do was what you were alluding to. They needed to turn music from being a product into a service. Is there anyone in this room who would not pay $2 or $3 a month to have any song ever recorded with a whole bunch of value-added services streamed onto your home stereo or into your car or onto your mobile device or your iPad or whatever? Streamed, right? You want to hear it? You want to hear your playlist? You want to hear Dance Party number 3 that you created? No one will steal music. Why would you take possession of the song if you can listen to it at any time you want to? The whole issue of intellectual property goes away, and it's a whole different payment system. But and if I listen to the Rolling Stones, Can't Get No Satisfaction, a micropayment goes to the Rolling Stones. We use actuarial economics. But to divvy up how the money gets allocated according to all the performers and labels and so on. But that requires an industry solution. And individual record companies didn't take that approach, and now they're going away. Most of them are going to disappear. And the new model is not Apple or Amazon or Google in the cloud, just putting songs in the cloud. We need to turn music into a service. And there are companies like Spotify, and expect Google and Apple to be announcing stuff like this over the next year. Yes?
There's been quite a bit of talk here this week at this conference about the growing income disparity in the United States. Does the future that you've suggested here help ameliorate that, or does it exacerbate that?
The future is something to be predicted or achieved, not something to be predicted. And here's how we could achieve a different and a more inclusive society where there are fewer great gaps. The key to wealth creation is entrepreneurship. 80% of new jobs come from companies that are 5 years old or less. And this should be the golden age of entrepreneurship, because little companies can have all the capability of big companies without the main liabilities, deadening bureaucracy, legacy cultures and systems and people and so on. But if you're a little company in this room, you know it's tough to get funding. Venture capital is pretty much broken, and banks are not lending money to little companies. So we need to fix these problems, and we make proposals in those areas. There's a whole new model of venture capital that's emerging. It's called Venture Capital 2.0 that engages the wisdom of crowds in finding wonderful new companies. And when it comes to getting banks to lend money, this goes right back to the heart of the financial crisis. If any of you were bankers here, you know the problem. I mean, you've got $1 trillion of these so-called toxic assets on your balance sheet. It's actually $1 trillion plus or minus $1 trillion, because no one really knows what they're worth. So how do we value these assets? Again, these ideas can be applied to fixing that. So there's a company called the Open Models Valuation Corporation that's arguing that information about all these assets, and for example, all risk management data should be placed in an exchange or a commons. And they're getting some traction on that. And in this exchange, we'll have all the world's leading financial modelers, but there's probably about 10,000 of them, that would come and go through an intense process to value these assets. If we can value them, the banks can get them off their balance sheets. They can be freed up to start to lend money to entrepreneurs. We can kickstart the economy, and we can deal with this problem of a jobless recovery. You can't fix income disparities unless you have wealth creation. Now, that's not the whole solution. There's the other side, too. You can create lots of wealth and still have big disparities. And we need policies and we need initiatives that are directed against that. One of them is to close the digital divide, not just in the United States, but globally. And someone made a comment, I can't remember who, the digital divide is not just about access. It's also about, because growing numbers are getting access, it's about being an informed and active user and knowing how to take advantage of that technology. there's really exciting developments that are happening on that. I was in Kenya with my family, and we met well, I guess she was about 13 years old, a goat herder. And she didn't have power, she didn't have water, but she had access to the internet. Now, it was fairly limited, and that will improve. Of course, these cause huge discontinuities in the society, too. I mean, she was in her early teens. She was pregnant with her second child, married to a 60-year-old who basically bought her for some goats. But she's got access to, I don't know, Sex in the City. So you can imagine the kind of cognitive dissonance going on in her head. But this is the kind of thing that we need to go through. It's the kind of thing of those young people in Tunisia getting access to, or in Iran, to secular information and thinking, wow, there's a whole different kind of society that's possible. This causes me great dislocation, but it's the kind of thing we need to go through. I think we're almost out of time. We'll do one more question here. Okay, we got two. Why don't we start with whoever gets the mic first? Okay.
Hi, I'm Emily Jacoby of Digital Democracy, and yesterday you asked a panel that I was on about the impact that social media was having on democracy, and I want to turn the question back to you. In terms of local government, national government, et cetera, how are all these trends that you've identified, how are they impacting our ability to participate in government?
Wow, well, this is one of the most exciting frontiers of transformation because, you know, democracy is a wonderful thing, but we do have an industrial age model. We created these representative institutions, but you vote and I rule. And you're pretty much a passive recipient of the democratic process after you vote. We could move, so we have a weak public mandate and we have inert citizenry. I've heard this a dozen times in the last few days. We need to get citizens knowledgeable and engaged if we're going to fix what ails us and fix this broken world. So we could move to a new model based on a culture of public deliberation and active citizenship. How would this work? Well, it's not Ross Perot in the electronic town hall. You get to vote every night on the evening news. Bad idea, okay? That's AKA the electronic mob. Democracy is a lot more than majority rule on a nightly basis. One of the things it's about is protecting the rights of minorities. But we could move to a very different model. And there are a dozen different initiatives that any mayor, some of you are mayors in the audience, or any a governor or the president could do. How about President Obama should go on television next Wednesday and announce the following week for 3 days, we're going to have a digital brainstorm in America where anyone can participate. And if you don't have a computer, here's how you can get access through libraries and other kiosks and things. The topic I've chosen is unemployment. How are we going to fall, or how do we close income disparities in the United States? And I'm going to come and participate occasionally in the conversation. All the best ideas are going to come up to me. There's ways of rating those ideas, the most discussed ideas. You can break off and have subgroups that can talk about different things. And I'm guessing I'm going to get a lot of great new ideas, but that's not the reason that we're doing it fundamentally. This is not about you telling me what to do. We don't want direct democracy. We elect our representatives for good reason. The reason I'm doing this is I think this will catalyze initiatives all across the country. The people will start talking to each other and get ideas, and they'll start learning, and government leaders will learn from them, and they will learn from the government leaders who are creating this conversation. And in doing so, we'll take a baby step towards a whole new model of democracy that's appropriate for an age of networked intelligence. Now, a digital brainstorm is one of a dozen things. Challenges, basically what Rob McEwen did at Goldcorp. Deliberative polling, electronic town hall meetings, policy wikis, and so on. There's a world of new opportunities whereby we can fundamentally change the model of democracy. I'm being waved that the party is over, so I'll say thank you very much.